All right, what's up, everybody? Sam here from Wall Street Mastermind. I'm back with another client interview today for you guys. Today I have Tristan with me. Tristan actually has a really interesting story because he actually went to military school for college, which you don't see that often, I would say. And Tristan also, let's see, it's October 3rd right now, and Tristan actually started working with us at Wall Street Mastermind, I think back in like mid-July, and it was actually a couple months after he had already graduated from school. So not like the most typical profile for clients that we usually work with, but we're happy to say that in a little over 2 months, he recently just signed his investment banking job offer. And so just wanted to get him to come on here and talk about his experience and share kind of how he was able to do that despite all the challenges he had to overcome. So hopefully you guys benefit from this. But Tristan, thank you for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, no problem.
So before we dive in, I know I gave a really high level overview, but why don't you kind of introduce yourself a little bit just so people kind of know your background?
Yeah, so I went to Virginia Military Institute. For those of you that don't know, it's in Lexington, Virginia, also known as the West Point of the South. Played Division I lacrosse there, was an economics and business major, and originally my plan after school was to try and become an Army officer, and then go to business school and then break into IB from there. Unfortunately, I actually tore my labrum in my hip playing lacrosse. And the way the Army works is, you can't get you have to go through all the paperwork and everything. And really from there, I was kind of like, just hurry up and wait is what they say in the Army. And I didn't really get the final go ahead, that I didn't know what was going to happen until about 2 weeks before I graduated, which was in May.
Mm.
And so then I graduated in May, and basically had no idea what I was going to do because that whole game plan for me and my 5-year plan went right out the door.
Right. I mean, that must have been just devastating for you because you feel like you have everything planned out. You're going to go to the Army, then go to business school, then do investment banking after that. Like, you had your eyes set on investment banking, but you thought you were going to be able to go into kind of the more traditional route, right? By going to business school, and then that all kind of got thrown out the window just because of this injury. So, I mean, how were you feeling at the time? Like, you had already missed the entire recruiting process, right?
Yeah.
How were you? Like, what was the kind of take us back to that moment when you realized, like, oh shoot, I'm not going to the Army. I got to find a job. Like, what was that feeling like?
Yeah, well, I guess, for me, one of the reasons why I chose VMI was because of what you just mentioned there. And I don't really know if there's a way to, quantify how I felt other than, it was probably one of the worst feelings I had just because, here I am thinking I had my whole life planned out. I'm definitely on that route. Wasn't the best in school, but I did pretty well for for what my GPA was there. And then, I had the whole lacrosse gig going for me. And then more importantly, I knew I was starting to network early. And I saw how some of the guys from VMI, used their Army experience to try and break into the bulge brackets after going from, one of the top 7 business schools. And then, you get that moment where you're like, wow, that goes right out the window. And you're like, what do I do now? Mm-hmm. And, or in my case, it's like, oh my gosh, I need to find a job or I'm living in my mom's basement for a while.
Right. Yeah. So you were living with your mom, trying to find a job, right? You didn't have a job. What were, like, when you first came to me, I remember you had like several different options in terms of like jobs that were available to you at the time, right? Do you remember what they were?
Yeah. So I actually had a offer in Chicago to do mergers and acquisitions at a boutique. And then I went through that whole recruiting process, and then about a couple of weeks before I was supposed to start that, the firm didn't do too well. And
Mm.
I guess they had to rescind my offer, which was one of the crazier things that happened to me. So you
Mm.
talk about, going from despair to like, wow, I got a job, back to that moment again that happened.
Mm.
But I guess the best part about VMI was, really I got that resilience where I was like, okay, time to get back in the grind mode. So then before I started talking with you, Sam, I had a credit analyst position that I interviewed for that I got a call back for. And then I had a couple of other offers with just doing business and finance related, but wasn't anything that I wanted to do in terms of, my sights of, breaking into investment banking.
Right, right. And I think that obviously, you coming from VMI, which is obviously not a target school. I mean, like, I think bankers, they love like that military background. And like you said, if you had gone to business school with the military background, I think like you went to an M7, I think that would have been like a pretty, well, I don't want to say easy, but probably as good of a path as you can have in terms of breaking in, right? But coming out of undergrad from a non-target with like, a 3.0 GPA and missing the entire recruiting process at the prime, it probably, I don't know, if you had to guess back then what your chances were of breaking into banking right out of undergrad, like what would you say it would have been at?
Pretty close to zero, if we're being honest with you. As of right now, from what I understand, other than another kid in my class, actually, we are the first two to get into investment banking right out of undergrad from our school. So this year was the first year we were able to do that.
Wow. Ever or just this for your class?
Yeah, no, ever.
Wow. You guys are the first two from VMI to ever get into banking right out of undergrad. That's crazy. Oh, so most of the alumni from VMI, they have to go back to business school first, is what you're saying.
Yes, that is correct. So almost all of them, I would say did either one of them, Army all the way to Air Force, everything in between, and then did business school and then got in as an associate or something like that. But the other kid that I went to school with, he's actually doing public finance. So,
Mm.
I like to say I got into the true part of the investment bank, just because I know I'm no friends with him. But that's a little rivalry we got going on.
Well, plus, like, I'm guessing he went through the normal recruiting timeline, right? So, like,
Yes, yeah. I can actually, yeah. So he actually did an summer analyst with the firm, and then speaking with him, he didn't like public finance. He wasn't like what he wanted to do necessarily. So he tried recruiting for other parts, didn't get in, and then ultimately went back to doing that. And we kind of discussed the differences, and I guess the main difference was he had a better GPA than me. So he definitely had a lot, he had a 3.4, 3.5 come out of VMI. And then he was staying in the Virginia area. So that's, a big Virginia zone. And then for me, when we initially talked, Sam, I was going for New York and something like that.
Right, right. Yeah, man, that's crazy. I didn't even realize that you were one of the first two people to ever do that. But considering all the circumstances, like the fact that you started after you graduated, or basically right when you graduated, the fact that you had a lower GPA than him, I mean, that's pretty amazing. So, I mean, again, obviously, huge congrats on that. Um, can you talk about a little bit about just kind of what your motivations are for wanting to break into banking? Like, I know you've known that you wanted to work in banking for a long time, but like, why do you want that?
Yeah, well, thing about me is I grew up really, really poor. Mom was a single mother of two, and I vividly remember eating McDonald's, for three meals a day, especially off the dollar menu. So that was like one of the things,
Wow.
I grew up with, and yeah, and I kind of seeing it now, and seeing my mom, it's like definitely a game changer. But we lived on Long Island. The Hamptons is 30, 40 minutes away from me. And I always used to see these guys, taking the LIRR out there. I'm just like, I never knew what they did. And, it always used to be like they work at the big banks, but I never knew, who they were, what they did. But I always used to see that type of guys going out there. I was like, wow, that's something I want to do. I want to make sure, if I can work the hours and work hard, I definitely should be able to enjoy that.
Yeah, yeah. You're like the true rags to riches story, man. Yeah, I mean that's I definitely respect that. That's to overcome like what you had to overcome and all the obstacles that were kind of thrown your way, all the curveballs, the injury, getting your offer rescinded for no reason. I mean, and to still end up where you're at, like you say, it just speaks to, I guess, your resilience, right? To like that mentality of never giving up until you really achieve your goal. So major props for that for sure. Um, so talk to us a little bit about kind of what you were doing prior to Wall Street Mastermind. So like obviously you already knew you want to recruit for banking, and in fact I think you have been recruiting for banking already, right? So what were some of the
Hmm.
other resources that you have been using to kind of help yourself prepare for the process?
Yeah. So, when I first, the funny thing I should say about me is like, I didn't even know about investment banking until after my, you know, sophomore year. So I had a junior internship at a bank in, right on Wall Street, but I wasn't doing any of that type. I was more of a rotational financial analyst role. So I didn't really know anything about investment banking until going into my senior year. And then as and everyone I hope knows is that that's super, super late to the game. And, I guess what I knew, what I need to do is like I need to familiarize myself. So, I did the Wall Street prep program. To be honest, that was no help to me whatsoever. It's just a guy clicking on a PowerPoint. And for me, personally, I like to learn, actually doing something and in person or you following steps because then I actually get to know, what I'm doing and how in Excel everything flows together. I was definitely using the Wall Street Oasis, online. It was kind of helpful for certain things, but it kind of was, the same thing I already knew. It was like networking, resumes, like that's no help to me. I had a 3.0 GPA. Everyone else I'm competing against has, 3.5 and up. And
Mm.
then I did the Invest Like the Street Analyst program. I personally enjoyed that just because I made models and got referenced in my interviews. And it was just more so a conversation starter because I got to say, hey, I'm actually putting in the time to do this. And it really helped with being able to say, hey, this is what I wanted to do. And then, on Facebook, and it always kept coming up these ads. It's funny how Facebook is with the Wall Street, mastermind program. And I kept seeing, the first time I saw it, it was in the winter. Success story, I think it was Pablo or something at the time, how he jumped from, I want to say, like audit or tax. He made to IB. And I was like, well, who
Yeah.
is this guy? What are these Facebook ads popping up? And then, another one kept popping up, I want to say in January, and they just kept popping up all the way leading to the time where my offer got rescinded in Chicago. And I was just like, you know what? I need to speak to this guy because if anything, he'll at least give me his advice
Mm.
and he'll be able to tell me like if I have a shot at doing this.
Mm. Right, right. Okay. So then we talked, right? So you saw these ads. Yeah, the guy that went from audit to banking was Brandon. But yeah, he's a similar situation. Or it's not completely the same, but similar as in he tried to get into banking. He graduated without a banking job, so he went into accounting, and he hated it, and he wanted to switch over to banking, and that's kind of when he came to us. So he was also kind of an atypical, non-traditional candidate. But so we talked, right? So you booked a strategy session, um, and then we talked. And then what happened after that? What happened from there?
Yeah, so my mom said I was crazy, first thing, in terms of trying to spend money to get this. She thought I was absolute, nuts in the head. Some other people thought I was crazy, but so I said, all right, well, I had a couple more interviews. One was with Equitech. I was a finalist there, and then, they went with another candidate. So that kind of hurt for their investment banking division. But then they called me in again to do for a consulting position, which, at the time I was willing to take anything just because, I was still living at my parents' house.
Right.
So did that. And then I got in there and then they said they wanted someone consulting specific experience. So I was just like, well, call me back if you wanted someone with that. But it didn't make sense to me, but I guess, didn't interview well.
Right.
That's what I say. And then I had an interview for a credit analyst position, selected for the next round. I declined it, didn't want to do anything. And then I had another interview with a corporate development position with American Dental. I didn't get it. That's what I think. I just never got the call back, whatever. And really, that's when it got to the point where I was like, my mom thought it was a scam. I was just like, listen, like, it's my money. If I'm going to spend it, to work with this guy, whatever the cost is in terms of working with him now. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But if it does, Mom, then, what are you going to say then? Got her to agree.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I like that's, look, so many students I talk to run into that, right? Like that exact thing you just described. Not the part about like interviewing with all these other firms before they decide to work with me. I mean, back then I was like, hey, yeah, that's totally cool. It makes sense. You got these other opportunities that you're kind of close on. If you can get it, then maybe you don't need to work with me. So then we just gave you some time to go and see if you could get those, right? And then when they didn't work out and you came back, and you say you want to do this, but your mom wasn't really on board with it. I mean, I can't tell you how many students I've talked to who really wanted to work with me, but then their parents said no, right?
Yeah.
And then the difference is like sometimes the student will do what you did, which is they'll say, well, you know what? Like, I need to do this. Like, I have to get this job and I'm absolutely committed to doing whatever I got to do to get it. And then they'll just do it regardless of what their parents think. And then other times, like a lot of students, I would say a lot of students, probably more than half of the students, if their parents say no, then they just won't do it. Right. And to me, I totally get it. I mean, it's like, at the end of the day, we trust our parents and they've been looking out for us our entire lives. And so if they tell us that something's probably a scam, it's easy to just say, okay, then it's probably a scam, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is, obviously you and I know that I'm not a scam, but also like a lot of times I'm just like, what I always tell people is your parents, they love you, but sometimes they give you advice when they don't have the proper context, right? Like when they don't
Yeah.
know how difficult investment banking recruiting actually is because they've never done it before, right?
Absolutely.
And they also don't understand, like most parents that I talk to, they're not investment bankers. They've never worked on Wall Street. They maybe have heard the term investment banking, but that's about it, right? They probably think investment banking has to do with like advising people on what stocks to buy or something, right? But like they don't know about all the benefits and compensation and exit opportunities and all the what I call like the return or the ROI on this investment, right? And so it's easy for them to, quite frankly, give you bad advice, right? And I always tell people too, is like, look, like at this point, if you're in college, most of the people that are listening to this, they're probably in college. You're pretty much an adult, like when it comes to something like your career, I think it's cool to get your parents' input, but if you and your parents disagree on it, ultimately you got to realize it's your career. Like your parents aren't going to be around to be responsible for whatever happens with your career, right? Like, can you imagine, Tristan, if you like listened to your mom and ended up not getting into banking and having a totally different career trajectory and whatever? Like, I mean, what's your mom going to be able to do about that? She can't like, maybe she'll apologize and, oh, sorry. like it doesn't do anything, right? So
yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, if you guys are listening to this and you're in college, a little prospect, so I actually worked, I had the option of working in a factory this summer or installing turf. And so what I ended up doing was I installed turf this summer, from 5 a.m. to whenever they finish. And I worked an unpaid investment banking internship remotely just to get that experience. And, that's kind of how I compromised with my mom saying, I'd be able to afford, being able to rent, in my house and everything, and making my car payments and things like that. But, if you're listening to this, you are in charge, of what you do in life. And, it was kind of, I went against my mom, which I've never done before. And, what Sam just mentioned, the return on investment was, in this case for me, I landed an offer just from pure grinding and willing to do the necessary work to get in. And I think that's the big difference I've seen. I've listened to a couple of these interviews before, and it's always been, at the end of the day, the person or the student or whoever has chosen, to make that difference in terms of, decision making and say, yes, I'm committed to working and I want to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And the funny thing is, I've actually gone back and looked at this because a third of my clients actually end up paying for this program on their own. And about 2/3 of my clients, their parents pay for the program. And the clients who end up paying for it on their own, they're always super committed to the process. They're always like super committed to doing the work because they have so much skin in the game, And
Yeah.
at that point, it's like, there's no other option but to get the offer, right? Because think about, like, you're basically pushing your chips all in and making a bet on yourself, and like, failure is not an option, right? And those clients who have more skin in the game, they tend to get the most extraordinary outcomes, right? Versus, I've also had clients that, I'm not saying all my clients do this, but I've had clients that, this is a small minority, but I've had clients that join the program and then they don't do the work and they quit, or they quit like 2 or 3 weeks in the program. And guess who paid for the program? It was their parents, right? Because they have no skin in the game, and they're like, oh, wow, actually, investment banking recruiting is much harder than I thought. I don't think I want to do this anymore. It was like, okay, well then, obviously you're not going to get the job then, right? Because, like, I mean, I'm not getting the job for you. I'm just helping you along the way, right? And there's like, people are like, well, how do I know it's going to work? And there's no guarantees, right? Yeah, there are no guarantees.
You can't guarantee that.
Yeah, there were no guarantees when you came in, Tristan, right? But it's like, again, going back to my point, it's like, I'd rather live in a way where I own all my decisions and I take responsibility for the consequences of my actions, right? Like, if I do what I wanted to do and it doesn't work out, I can live with that. But if I do what my mom wanted me to do or what my dad wanted me to do and it wasn't what I wanted to do and it doesn't work out, I'm going to be resentful for like the rest of my life, right? Because I'm going to be like, why did I listen to you, right?
If I listened to my mom, I would have got a compliance job at a bank in the city. So it's a big difference there.
Well, look, I'm glad that we worked that it worked out for you. I still remember, like, first thing when you joined the program, you're like, my mom thinks this is a scam. I can't wait for the day that I can tell her, like, I told you so or whatever. And so I was like, yeah, let's freaking do it, right? Like, we got to make it happen because I don't want anyone out there thinking I'm a scam either,
Yeah, no, she definitely got one of those over dinner when I came home from Virginia and had the offer. I said, I told you.
But what did she say?
Well, she was very excited for me, obviously, but she's more so, she's like, oh, wait, I completely forgot you work with them. I was like, well, what do you think, like, how do you think I went from, interviewing for Equitech and, quote unquote, going with somebody else to, for those of you that don't know, I originally interviewed for B. Riley FBR for their capital markets position. I told Sam, I thought I had it in the bag. They declined me, actually. And then the following Monday, because I was still in Virginia, they brought me in again and, a generalist position, which is, a lot better. A lot to do with the fact with how I told my story, which I worked on with Sam, and just also, how I delivered. One of the biggest questions I got was, what's the biggest skill you bring to the table? And, at the end of the day, the head managing director, he told me, I answered it very well because most of the people were telling me, they're hardworking or, they're smart or something like that. And he's like, I hear that every time. But, I told him, attention to detail, from the Army, from lacrosse, all this other stuff. And he loved that. But I wouldn't have necessarily said that if it wasn't for Sam because, he told me to stand out and be that atypical candidate in that case.
Yeah, man. I mean, the fact that so the capital just so that our listeners understand, the capital markets opening, they have one job, right? They have one opening,
Yeah.
right? And then they gave it to someone else, but they liked you so much, or at least some of these people, like some of the managing directors and stuff that met you, they liked you so much that they basically went and figured out another way to place you in just like the generalist investment banking pool instead. It's almost like they created this other opening for you, right? This other headcount just so they can hire you, right? And then they brought you back for another, I guess you could call it a super day, but from the sounds of it, like, it seems like you already had the job before you walked in there. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So the generalist position is actually what all their analysts do, so they get to work on all the deals. And so, the head managing director that I initially networked with, really liked my story. He told me, he's like, get in here 9:30 on Monday. I was like, I don't have a suit. I hope you don't mind. I was helping my aunt move at the time. And he's like, no, I don't care. Just show up. And, the way he worded it kind of sounded like, oh, well, that's weird. He just turned me down for the capital markets job. Weird how you're telling me to get in here, but I was like, will do. And yeah, I think I had the job before I even walked in there. I remember interviewing over the phone with someone in LA, and he's like, tell them I gave you the yes and to get you in the office as soon as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's awesome, man. Because like you said, to be able to get them to do that for you, you had to really, really impress some people, right? Not just like anybody, but you had to impress the important people at the firm, like the people that actually had the pool to be able to make these types of exceptions happen, right? And so I'm glad that, all the behavioral work that we did and developing your story and talking about your strengths and highlighting the right things, that all of that stuff paid off, right? Aside from kind of the behavioral stuff, like, were there anything else that kind of you and I worked on together that you found to be really beneficial for you as you were going through this process?
Yeah, well, I mean, besides behavioral stuff, I think from module 1 all the way to, walk me through the 3 statements and everything has been, I want to say, the biggest game changer in terms of how I look at certain things and how I even speak or answer questions. I mean, the biggest thing I found very helpful was I remember, I don't know if you remember, Sam, was, the hard question you gave me through, our initial conversation was like $100. How does the inventory impact the 3 statements? And I gave you I didn't memorize that question. I can't give you the answer. So that, for you guys that are listening, I did not know how to answer that. For all my interviews before, I just kind of memorized everything. I really didn't know how the 3 statements, worked in terms of being able to speak about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the greatest thing that we worked on was I had the full confidence, going into my interviews that if I got any technical, not only was I able to answer it, but I could answer it, confidently and, really much say, wow, I got that right, right on the spot. And I think the difference in my confidence level walking into the interviews was the biggest attribute to me because I really wasn't nervous.
Mm.
And I think that helped me a lot.
Right. Right. No, and that's a great point is that, I mean, because before when you were using, Wall Street Prep or Wall Street Oasis or, probably the same interview guides everyone's using, and you're just memorizing these things, it's hard to be confident when you're just going off of memorization, right? Because you're always worried about, oh, are they going to ask me the questions that I actually memorized, or are they going to ask me something that I haven't memorized, right? And so you can never know for sure that you're going to be able to ace whatever they throw at you. The way that we teach technicals in the program is we don't make you memorize anything, right? I don't think I make you memorize a single thing. Like everything is just teaching you how the concepts actually work, right? Like having a fundamental conceptual understanding of all the technical topics so that it doesn't really matter what they ask you, right? Like no matter what they ask you, you're going to adapt and be able to think on your feet and give them the right answer, right? And I remember by the end of the program, before you had these interviews and we were doing mock interviews, I had no idea what to expect because I think that was like our first mock interview that we had done. And you knocked it out of the park. And I was like, damn, like you're ready, like I was like, you're gonna go out and you're gonna crush it, which is exactly what you did. So that's awesome, man. I mean, obviously you have to put in the work to make that happen, but you definitely came a long way in just like 2 short months, right? So well done for that. Any last minute advice for our listeners on, just anything recruiting related in general or whatever you want to tell them?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing or the first thing I'll say that really impacted me was, Sam is not going to guarantee you anything. You just heard him, say before, unless you have skin in the game, and you really want it, you're not going to have that super high success rate. For me, in my case, that was I shelled out the money. I had to pay for it on my own. I did turf from 5 a.m. to whenever we finished, and then a non-paid thing, investment banking internship, just to say I had that on my resume and I wanted it. If you don't have skin in the game or you're going to waste his time, just don't even bother because you're not going to get anywhere and you're just going to end up losing money. It's not worth it. Right. And I guess the other thing is, in terms of networking and everything, I think I sent over, I want to say close to 1,000+ emails. Ooh. As crazy as that's going to sound. And
how many of those happened after you joined the program? I'm just curious.
500 at least.
Okay. So you sent over 500 emails in like 2 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I was on the phone a lot, you could say.
Yep. And would you say like kind of like the way we walk you through the networking process, was that kind of different from how you were thinking about networking before you came in, or like what did you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so originally when I was networking, I was, trying to go through my alumni connections or, Washington Lee is right next to VMI and they have a pretty high rate for going into IB. So I was trying to use that connection. I was really trying to use any connection that I had. And then, once we went through the networking module, I changed up, how I sent emails, to kind of find a style that was working the best. Obviously you're going to get, some people that don't answer and you're going to get people that answer, but, I wanted to see what the best success rate was for me in my case. And then really I was willing to just send an email to, I think, anybody who would ever be willing to speak with me. And that was the biggest difference, was how I found those people and how I targeted them, or, what I brought up, in our conversation to get them to like me more. Mm-hmm. So networking module definitely helped in terms of how I changed my style in terms of speaking with people.
Yeah, I think it's always hard for people to imagine like what we could possibly teach them about networking, right? Because people always come and think like, well, networking, I mean, I know how to network, like just like send out some emails, try to talk to people, ask them some canned questions about how they got to this point in their career, and then like hope they give me a referral, right? Like that's what most people think networking is, but in reality, there's a lot more to it than that, right? Like we always say, or I always tell my clients, like networking is just another form of interviewing, right? It's just it's the
absolutely
interview, it's the interview before the real interview. You're auditioning for the opportunity to actually interview, right? And so a lot of people are really, really bad at having these networking conversations. And if you're bad at having those conversations, I don't care how many people you talk to, they're not going to refer you, right? Versus like your situation is like, hey, when you like, how did you find this FBR opportunity, by the way?
Through networking.
Yeah, exactly.
The first, through networking. Before, how I got the initial interview was, I think I spoke to someone in New York who then referred me to someone in Virginia. That's a CEO of a privately, really, really big private company. So I spoke to the CEO of a really, really big private company because he went to school with him, and sent my resume into, and then someone at B. Riley. And then I spoke to that guy who's now my boss, and so that's how that happened. But I went all over the place in the country just to get that initial introduction.
Yeah, and I mean, think about how many people you had to impress or win over along the way just to get that opportunity, right? You had to, like, every single person you talked to along the way could have just decided that, no, I'm not going to help this guy, right? Like, no, this guy has already graduated from college. No, he, like, doesn't have a super high GPA. No, he didn't go to target school, blah, blah, blah. Like, there's a lot of reasons they could have had for just not going out of their way to help you. But every single person in that process that you came across decided that they wanted to help you. And that comes down to you being super, super effective at having those conversations, right? And the way you were positioning yourself as a candidate and telling your story and really winning them over and saying, yeah, oh, wow, I want to help this guy. That's how you came up with this phenomenal, opportunity. I mean, FBR is like a super legit bank, right? And for you to get that, whatever, 3, 4, what is it, 5 months now, 5 months after you graduate college, that's almost unheard of, right? And so that's what networking can do, man. So like some people, there's so much networking that people just don't understand. And it's like, I really want to drive that point home. It's like, if you think you already know everything there is to know about networking, you probably don't, right? Like the most ignorant people are always the most confident because they think they already know everything, right?
Yeah, and the other that piggyback off that was, you never know who you're going to speak to or network with that has a friend of a friend of a friend. I mean, because of what I've done now, I actually had lunch with a guy that went to Brown. He's a really big finance guy in the city, while I'm still in New York before I moved down to Arlington. But, that came about, he wanted to actually have lunch with me because he heard my story from a friend. And, I couldn't believe I had lunch with him the other day. But that was just because I spoke to somebody off a non-finance related, conversation. Just had to do with, he played lacrosse somewhere on Long Island, and I just was, giving him a little stuff because my high school team was better. And I told him, what I was doing, and he's like, "Oh, wow, I know some people, I'll be in touch." I was like, "Okay, I don't know what that means, but looking forward to it." And, that led to me having lunch with that guy, and it was pretty insane, because he told me how he heard about me.
That's amazing, man. That's an amazing story. So yeah, man. I mean, look, you obviously did a lot of things right, and you took a risk. You bet on yourself. You're super committed. You obviously did all the hard work. You grinded it out. You sent over 500 emails. You landed this phenomenal opportunity. I mean, you earned it, man. Like, you deserve this, and I'm so happy for you. And you are a testament to the fact that if you're committed enough, anything is possible, right? I think a lot of times people tell themselves all these stories and reasons, or like whatever, self-limiting beliefs and excuses for why they're not going to be able to get in banking. And it's like, well, I don't know, you probably haven't tried hard enough, or you haven't done everything there is to do. So anyway, for all of you that are listening, hopefully Tristan's story gives you some inspiration to keep fighting the good fight, right? To keep continuing down this path that you're currently on, assuming this is something you really want to do, right? And obviously, having the desire, that's just the first step, right? You need to have the right game plan and the right strategies and the right, skill set and knowledge and network. There are a lot of things, a lot of different pieces that need to fall into place for you to actually get to that end goal. right? Like getting into investment banking, you know, it's not easy, right? Very few people who want to do it are actually able to do it. And so you got to ask yourself, it's like, what are you currently missing, right? And you got to put your ego aside and say, hey, these are the things I don't know how to do. And if I can't figure it out on my own, I got to go out and get help, right? And so if you're looking for help with investment banking recruiting, right, whichever aspect of it, um, I would encourage you to book a strategy session with our team. Okay, so the strategy session is free, right? It's basically that first conversation that Tristan and I had. Like he said, he came into it just at a minimum, you get a bunch of free advice, right? And you have nothing to lose. Like we don't work with every single person that we talk to. Sometimes because we don't think we are the best fit to help them, and sometimes because they don't want to, and that's totally fine, right? But either way, what I can promise you is you're going to find this call to be highly valuable, right? And it'll just give you a lot of new perspective that you probably currently don't have. And if we find out that hey, we are a great fit to work together, that's cool too. Then we work together, and then we'll try to get you, you know, a phenomenal outcome like we've done for Tristan. But if not, then you know, at a minimum, we just want to help you get one step closer to your dreams, right? So if you want to book the strategy session, you can do so at www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. Okay. The street in the URL is abbreviated to ST. So it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. Okay. And you'll get on the phone, speak with one of our team members, and then, you know, we will give you the best advice we have for you based on your situation after we learn, you know, what challenges you're currently having, what you've already been doing, and things like that. Okay. So that's going to be it for today, guys. Tristan, again, I want to thank you so much for just taking the time to come on and share your advice with everybody. I know you're in the middle of moving before starting your new job, so you're super busy, and I appreciate you for doing this. And definitely stay in touch. Don't be a stranger. And I look forward to, you know, following kind of your progress and your all the success that's to come as you progress in your career.
Thanks for having me, and you know, thanks for working with me, Sam. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, it was my pleasure. All right, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in. And, you know, as always, we'll be back with more of these in the near future. Okay. Talk to you guys later. Bye.